I am still in love with this build. It has not only blasted its way through all the in-game content, it has blasted its way into my heart. Hi, it's Lerald, and this is my update on the Forbidden Rite Pathfinder build that I've been playing for the last week or so. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. So let's go ahead and start with kind of the main thing that I have changed here, and that is I've gotten rid of Annihilation's Approach. Now, Annihilation's Approach is really good. It gives you Adrenaline, which is great. It's a massive increase to your damage and your attack and cast speed and your move speed, which is really nice. It also gives you a bit of physical damage reduction, which is good. The downside is, of course, the 6,000 fire damage a second you take when you have Approaching Flames active, and the point of wearing these boots is you basically always want to have that active. Now, you have 90% fire res, like I'll hit my life flask here and go up to 90 fire res, so that's going to be cut down to 600, and then 50% of that is getting converted into chaos damage from Divine Flesh, which is then being reduced by Doppelganger guys and by being sane. So you're really only taking more like 400 fire damage per second, 430 or so. That's still a ton. That's still a lot of damage to take. And when you combine that with Progenesis Dot and Petrified Blood Dot, you'll be taking a lot of damage all the time. Now, normally that's fine because you're regenning. I mean, as you can see, massive amounts of life. The problem is that if you run into something that turns off your life regen, or I mean, you just miss Divine Life Flask for a second or two, you'll just instantly be flattened by that combination of dots. And so dropping Annihilation's Approach really helped. Just by taking one of those pieces of irritating damage over time away really helped a lot. Additionally, by running Annihilation's Approach, you basically have no way to be fully ailment immune, and so like dealing with Scorch and Brittle and Sap and Shock and Ignite was just very annoying. I mean, Ignite is another potential damage over time effect to have layered onto you. So what I have done is I have crafted some boots. Now I should look at and talk about the damage first. So what I was kind of looking at in the past was like the damage from hitting with all your projectiles, and that's nice. Normally speaking, against humanoid enemies, smaller enemies, but you know, I would say like Uber Elder, Shaper, they're humanoid-sized enemies. You're only going to hit with about 5 projectiles. Generally, that's kind of the upper limit. It's really only bigger enemies like the final boss of Fortress or the final boss of Abomination that you're able to hit with more than 5. And so really what you want to do is you kind of want to look at the 1 projectile number and then multiply that by 5, and then compare that to the dot cap, which is, I think, 35.8 million DPS, something around that number. So that means, if we just bust out a calculator real quick, 35.8 divided by 5, you're looking at around 7.1 million DPS required in this spot here in order to hit the dot cap consistently on all targets. Now, if we go to our items tab here and we switch to Annihilation's Approach, easy as pie. So easy to hit the dot cap. You're way over it with Annihilation's Approach. The problem, of course, comes from all of the damage over time that you're taking from Annihilation's Approach, which isn't necessarily a problem. I mean, like, I think 85% of the people who are playing Forbidden Rite Pathfinder are using Annihilation's Approach. But basically all the complaints that I've seen, all the questions I've seen that are, you know, how do I stop dying, or I keep getting killed by these boots, you know, all of my frustrations came from these boots. So I switched over to running magic boots, which as you can, or rare boots, crafted rare boots, which as you can see, less damage, technically a little bit below the cap, probably rocking more like 34 million DPS, 6.6 million times 5, 33 million DPS. Now there are a couple of points you can put in here, kind of some very like weird ones to throw in, just to squeeze that number up a little bit more, but just these 2 small passives for Poison Dot Multi will really push you up quite a bit more. 6.8, 3 times 5, that'll get you up into the 34 million range. That's close enough. Really, it's close enough. Like, I have not noticed the loss in damage from dropping Annihilation's Approach, and I have noticed the increase in tankiness. I've been able to just straight up face tank like Shrine Empowered and even Possessed tier 17 bosses. I've been able to face tank Uber bosses. I face tanked Uber Cortex immediately after hitting level 100. I leveled from 99 to 100. I only died 1 time, and that 1 death was not because of me playing bad or the game even like being unfair. I crashed and I logged back in, and the Omen of Amelioration that I had in my inventory was gone and all my auras were turned off. That was the only time I even came close to death. was with like basically my computer turned off. So feel pretty good about the tankiness of this build, and I think ultimately I probably could get back up over the dot cap again, even on the like smaller targets, if I just went for a weapon that wasn't multi-crafted. Obviously that would take the graveyard crafting. That would be kind of a chore to craft, but basically something that had completely good modifiers across the board instead of being graveyard crafted, or even if I think it just had like passive cast speed on it and then meta crafted chaos dot multi, I think that might actually get me over the dot cap as well. Haven't looked, but you know, that is ultimately fine. In terms of the boots that I've gone with, I started out playing around with some fractured hunter boots that do have this, as you can see, 11% faster poison damage infliction. These actually wind up not being very good. You know, for one, you lose out on implicits because it is influenced, and that also means you're kind of losing a suffix. And like 11% faster poison damage infliction is higher than 7%. 11 is higher than 7, but the 4% increased action speed is still better. Again, another way to really like get up into that 7 million DPS range per poison per projectile would be to just kind of elevate really elevate both of the implicits, elevate one and then reroll the other, and elevate that one and try and get like basically 5% increased attacks action speed, get like the tier 3. I don't have any of them in my inventory right now, but just get action speed from these. They're pretty expensive. The what are they called? Grand Eldritch Embers. Get 5% action speed from that, and then first get this, the Grand Eldritch Ichor. Poison inflict deal damage faster, which I do have here. Use Orbs of Conflict to elevate those, and then roll on 5% action speed with Grand Eldritch Embers. That would be pretty expensive, but that would be the play here. Now, in terms of how I crafted these boots, they were very simple to craft. I bought some 35% increased move speed fractured boots. You can also craft these with the graveyard. I spent a lot of time trying to craft some nice fractured move speed boots with the graveyard. I ultimately wound up not making anything that was useful for myself, but I did wind up selling probably like 30 or 40 divines worth of fractured boots off to other people. So other people were able to make use of my failures. That's good, but like they just didn't really work for what I was looking for the build. But then after that, just used Deafening Essences of Loathing until I was happy with the suffixes, and then I slapped just the most basic, like one lesser Eldritch Ember on, and then used Eldritch Currency, Eldritch Orbs of Annulment to annul off all of the prefixes since the fractured move speed was there. And then I just kind of rolled, like basically used these Eldritch Annuls and regular Exalts until I was happy with like whatever tier 1 mod, or just basically whatever prefix I could get on there, and then just craft life on there, and that would be fine. And then of course the reason that this is able to be elemental ailment immune is ancestral vision. So we have 100% spell suppression, and the way that I've gotten that is I have spell suppression on Helm, just like I did before, and then spell suppression from passives, and then just a bunch of spell suppression tattoos. I've just put lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of tattoos, and I used POB to make sure I'd actually hit 100%, which I have, and that's good. I cannot remember where spell suppression is in here. Here we go, right here. And so as you can see, yeah, I'm getting 15% from Inveterate on the tree, 15% from the Evasion Mastery, 14% from the Helm, 8% from Intuition, and then just a ton of tattoos because we have so much dexterity in this build, and our dex requirement because of the amulet, because of the Replica Dragon Fang's flight that we're running is relatively low. We only need about 143, and we are over 145. And so Ancestral Vision here gives us, because we have that 100% spell suppression chance, that'll give us 50% elemental ailment avoidance. Good. Great. Then we get 30% from using a Deafening Essence of Loathing on some boots. That gets us up to 80%. Where's the other 20%? It comes from this wheel right here. 8% from thick skin, and then 4% from each of these. That puts us right at 100%, 102. We're good to go. Now these boots also in addition to like giving life, which Annihilation's approach does not. They also give a bit of fire res and int, which weren't mandatory, but they were kind of nice. And so obviously to get that Ancestral Vision, I had to drop the rare jewel that I was using before that was giving me a bit of poison chance, a bit of poison duration, a bit of like, I think life and fire res, something like that. Now, obviously these boots make up for the life and fire res being lost. They don't necessarily make up for the poison duration being lost, and they definitely don't make up for the poison chance being lost. And so you fix the poison chance by putting Tattoo of the Tafa Shaman onto one of your int nodes, and then I had a couple of other leftover int nodes because this has so much int on it. I'm way over my int requirement now. And so I fixed that, not really fix that, I just kind of helped myself to a bit of reduced effective curses. Felt pretty good. And then I did buy an Ancestral Vision that had reduced effective curses, so I'm at, what is this, like 34% reduced effective curses? Not curse immune, not even close, but feels pretty good. The biggest problem I have with Petrified Blood is that it will prevent any sort of restoration of life. I think that's the phrasing that they say here. Your life cannot be raised above low life. That's it. So the only thing that will take you above 50% health is your life flask. So ideally a Watcher's Eye that's like perfect for this build would be one that increases your life flask recovery, like your life recovery from your life flask while affected by vitality. The problem I have with that is very simple. They're expensive because they're the only thing that really works for this build. Now you can go with something that gives you Leech or something that gives you life per enemy hit, and that is ultimately what I've done here. Like I said, I think in the last video I played around with a bunch of Watcher's Eyes. I think I've now sold them all off. Ultimately, I liked this one because even though it only applies when you're below half health, you are like unfathomably tanky below half health. And additionally, I rerolled, instead of running suppression as the Eater of Worlds implicit on my gloves, I switched over to Chaos Damage Leeched its life. Again, even though that won't take you over half health, it does kick in for several hundred healing per second. And when I say several hundred, like on one projectile, it's about 560. If you're hitting with most of your hits, you're probably going to get like 1500 to 2k life per second from Life Leech while you're below half health. This makes you just insanely tanky. This combination of overlapping defensive layers is really, really strong. So I kind of felt like the build was, I wouldn't say exactly complete, but kind of complete when it was right like this at level 98. That's basically where I was. So I didn't really know what to do with my last 2 points. I kind of played around with it a lot. I know a lot of people like to take this mastery, Spell Suppression Mastery. It gives you 2.1% more EHP. I think you could put those 2 points into the Poison Dot multi here. That will slightly increase your overall DPS. I think more or less this will give you, what is this, about 300,000 damage per second per projectile. So like 1.5 million more DPS for these two nodes. I think that's pretty solid. That gets you pretty close to the dot cap on all targets in this setup. I have ultimately been playing around with this Mana and Flask effect node while at level 99 because it puts you up, as you can see, it raises my fire res from 89 to 90, and it gives you a little bit more impact on your Progenesis. It's giving about 4% more effective HP. Pretty huge. And then I've actually, once I hit level 100, I've just been playing around with this node right here, Evasion and Life. Gives about 3.5% more EHP. It actually does give about 0.5% more damage. Not huge, definitely not on the level of this Poison Dot multi by any stretch. But like a non-zero DPS and HPS increase out of each of these two nodes. And I think that's worked pretty well. As I've kind of said several times now, I haven't felt like I've struggled at all offensively with this build. There's nothing I can't kill. Even with going slightly below the dot cap, again, due to dropping the Annihilation's approach in favor of some rare boots, I haven't felt like I lacked damage except for when I've accidentally run tier 17 maps that have terrible modifiers like debuffs expiring 200% faster on monsters, or like monsters being poison immune, that kind of thing. And in that case, that's really just me running the wrong mods. Having another 1 million DPS isn't going to fix that, fix the monsters being immune to my damage. I think you can play with these 2 nodes here and just go for max damage if you wanted to, but I really have preferred the defensiveness. I've been so pleased by how incredibly unkillable this build is by the vast majority of content, and certainly any sort of bossing content at all. I've really just been able to face tank stuff to a degree that I've never been able to do on any other build I've ever played before. Additionally, because I have because I'm elemental ailment immune, because I don't need Soul of Garrukon, I've been able to switch over to Soul of Shikari, which makes poison damage a complete non-factor, even on tier 17 maps where you have the modifier that all hits from monsters poison and poisons last longer. And so previously you might be running around and having 40 or 50 stacks of poison on you. Now you're going to never have more than 4. It says at least you can never be hit by more than 3, but there have been plenty of times where I have had 2 monsters hit at identical moments, and somehow I have 4 stacks of poison. Not great, but not the end of the world. And Soul of Shikari really, really gives you a massive amount of damage reduction because you take so much damage as chaos damage, and then that Captured Terror of the Infinite Drifts gives you 5% reduced chaos damage taken. So there's just a straight reduction of so much damage. We can even look at it in the config here, 238 is our effective max health. If we switch over to nothing, 233. Gruthkul is a bit of bait, but if we were to look at Yugal, right? Yugal, or what were we running before? Garrukon, 233 as our max hit on Garrukon, 238 on Shikari, pretty good. I do think Gruthkul, maybe a little bit of... Maybe it's an option, but I think it's maybe a little bit of bait because there's so much in this game that will overwhelm your physical damage reduction, or stuff that will remove your physical damage reduction effects. And so that 1% can actually be 0% a lot of the time. Whereas Shikari, that damage reduction is always going to be working, and the less duration of poisons is really nice. Poisons are very annoying, so it's very nice to have those cut out. All right, so now I kind of just want to run through kind of a big FAQ of some of the most commonly asked questions that I think I've seen along the way, and I'll start with the most basic one. How do your flasks use themselves? There's this tab down here at the bottom of the crafting bench, the enchantment for flasks. You just set, I like to do use when charges reach full, and I just put that on all my flasks. You can do at the end of their effect, and then that way they will technically be a little bit more efficient, but you do have to then use them once every time you join a map, so I always prefer use when they reach full. How is my life flask automating itself? It isn't. I hit it on cooldown. It's probably my the thing that is the biggest issue with my play, the biggest mistake I make is hitting it too often. You can kind of see this is kind of my normal cadence for how often I hit it while I'm playing, and you can see I'm hitting it way more than I need to. How do I manage to hit the life flask every 4 seconds or so for hours and hours on end? Strong hands. I did see some people suggest using infused, since we have anathema that gives us up to as many curses as we have power charges, and so if we're able to take infused and go up to 4 power charges, we could then have 4 curses. I think the issue with that is then finding a way to get that 4th curse in. It would be nice to have punishment. I think one suggestion I saw that might be worth it if you're willing to deal with the irritation is having a helm that has cast all spells that are in the helm or in the item when you press focus. For me, I'm never willing to use focus in any build. I don't care how strong it is. I don't care if it deletes everything instantly. Just the idea of adding in focus is a non-starter for me. But if you're game for that, then I think that taking infused and shifting the, where is it here? Cast when damage taken, tempt chains, and feeble and despair. Shifting all of that into the helm, and then instead of a cast when damage taken, just putting punishment in there as well. And doing that, I think you can do that in another piece of gear, but now I actually don't know. Let's take a look. Focus. All right. Cast, focus. I probably should have put other words in. Oh, here it is. Trigger socketed spells when you focus. There you go. So yeah, that's a helm only option. So that would be a thing you could do. I think the biggest issue I would have with doing that, other than the obvious one of not wanting to use focus, is you would lose that crafted prefix of Fizz taken as fire damage, which does mean you would take a fair amount more damage. Just to pull out a punishment curse here to kind of show it off, though, I think if you are willing to do that setup, you can see punishment just at level 1 is 30% increased damage on enemies that are below 50% health, and 20% less move speed and 10% less damage on those enemies. So I think that this would generally be better for like bossing. Like actually running this setup would be better than having that Fizz taken as fire damage prefix for bossing, maybe. But again, you know, it's an extra keybind, so it's like, are you willing to undergo that little bit of inconvenience to have that little bit of extra power? And for some people, the answer may be yes. For me, the answer is no, but I do see the merit in the idea. Another question that I've seen a lot, how do you fit in the reservation efficiency? How do you fit in all the auras? So for the amount of mana that I have, like normally the actual amount of mana that you have in a build doesn't really come into play for fitting in auras, but because we are fitting in vitality, I don't know, somewhere here. Yeah, here we actually have a flat mana cost. So having more like flat mana, potentially from something like Primal Spirit, just increasing our maximum mana and mana flask effect, and then Primal Spirit, those two nodes could maybe get you over the hump for vitality. You don't need a level 4 Enlighten. Like this is a level 3, you don't need a level 4. You could use Deafening Essences of Loathing on your helm to give yourself mana reservation efficiency as a suffix. That's an option. Like that would probably do me more good than the 10 fire res that I'm getting here. Those can be a little expensive. You can also use Eater of Worlds Implicits to give yourself mana reservation efficiency. You can do that in a pinch, but getting Fizz taken as Chaos is really good for your damage reduction. So I think long term that would still be the goal. Get more Fizz taken as Chaos. Wow, there's a really easy way for me to upgrade some of my damage here. Actually, get a higher level Searing Exarch Implicit mod. Get like a grand or at least a greater cast speed, get like 1 or 2% more increased cast speed on the helm. That would definitely help. And, you know, you can say the same for like the gloves here. Getting more chaos dot multi on the gloves would definitely help as well. I don't really think that the Eater of Worlds chaos damage leeched his life is like mandatory by any stretch. I was using spell suppression before, but it's only 6%. It's such a small amount. You can definitely make up for that with 3 tattoos and then use something else there. On your gloves, I think the action speed and the poison damage being inflicted faster on the boots as implicits is really, really good. And like the quality of life of not being set on fire by Annihilation's approach and actually being ailment immune has really like been worth the loss of maybe a couple million damage per second. So another FAQ that I've gotten is, can you use a neck other than Replica Dragonfang's Flight? And so like I have pulled up the +1/+1 with dot multi amulet that I have on my Toxic Rain Pathfinder. And obviously, as you can see right here, it's a DPS loss, but that is actually because of the Anoint. If we switch over to Serpentine Spellslinger, it is a damage increase. See, it's about 3% more damage. It also gives some nice stats, strength, int, more int, worthless crit chance, unfortunately, but then a prefix that we could actually craft as something maybe a little more useful, like, I don't know, life, or, you know, it doesn't really matter. The problem with this is that Replica Dragonfang's Flight is really not just fixing damage, it's fixing a lot of different things. Like the Ellie Res is fine, the attributes are fine, those are pretty easy to fix with a rare crafted neck. The reservation efficiency and the reduced attribute requirements are a lot more difficult to fix. Now, there's stuff you can do to get around those attribute requirements. You could take a talent like, or passive like Primal Spirit. You could take some of these ones like Prowess and Thief's Craft. I do see a lot of people putting points in to just fill out their stats. You know, you can just get enough stats off of your amulet to make that work as well. Like, that's definitely a way to get around Replica Dragonfang's Flight and be able to swap over to a rare instead. It's possible, but as you can see, this is only about 3% more damage, and this is an amulet that is probably more like 40 or 50 divines as opposed to this Replica Dragonfang's Flight, which, like, yes, there is a finite number of Replica Dragonfang's Flights that have Forbidden Rite on them and are available and online at any given time. There's a finite number of everything, and certainly with this build, and I think some other people have also made Forbidden Rite builds, you know, they've kind of There's been a bit of a squeeze on them, but ultimately I do think that Dragonfang's Flight is like the most efficient, best option for your neck, and going with something that is rare crafted, like +2 neck with dot multi on it, it's an option, but it is a much more expensive option that you then have to account for elsewhere. Like you wouldn't have the option of doing like a Deafening Essence of Loathing helm, a reservation efficiency helm. You would have to do that to be able to then fit in all of your auras. And that is like just a lot more crafting, a lot more effort, a lot more expense going into this compared to just using a replica Dragonfang's Flight in the first place. I think to move on to the next question here in the FAQ is, can you make the build work without Progenesis? You can certainly make the world work without Progenesis. You can make the build work without Progenesis, but it is better with Progenesis. Progenesis is an insanely strong, insanely tanky flask, and taking that out of it doesn't make it stop functioning. It's just not as good. So ultimately what I think I would use here if I were to like drop the Progenesis and use a magic flask is I would just use a regular amethyst flask, and then I would use like probably curse immune suffix, like reduced effect of curses as the crafted suffix, or not crafted, but basically rolled suffix. And it's not as good, obviously, but it's definitely good enough to get you up and rolling to get the like 60 divine or so farmed up to buy Progenesis, because that really is the goal here. That is the most expensive item in the build. That is kind of the thing that ties the whole build together and really kind of transitions it from being a pretty decent, very budget build into something that can really push through and smash all of the end game content. All right, so I think that pretty much wraps things up for this video. I have been really pleased with this build. It's definitely exceeded every expectation I had coming in, and I had pretty high expectations. I wanted a build that could do everything. It has demolished everything. It has been so much tankier than I thought it possibly could be. I never thought I would have a build that I could just like face tank Shaper Beams, like Uber Shaper Beams, Uber Elder Beams, face tank Uber Cortex, Uber Tier 17s, or I guess right, Tier 17s are themselves Uber. Yeah, it's really been super satisfying build, just kind of combining all of the things that I love in the game: Hexadel's Machination and Forbidden Rite and Pathfinder and Progenesis and chaos damage over time, kind of everything that I love really coming together to make a build that is just insanely strong. And now with the removal of Annihilation's approach, actually pretty convenient and feels pretty good to play again as well. All right, I think that pretty much covers it. Let me know if you have any questions, and thanks for watching. Bye.